this time. Good evening, everyone. The regular business meeting of the Kansas City Public Schools Board of Directors of November 20th is called to order. The secretary will call the roll.
Ms. Manser?
Here.
Mr. Abarca?
Present.
Ms. Cortez?
Here.
Mr. Hogan?
Here.
Dr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Wasserstrom?
Here.
Ms. Wolfsey?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask my colleagues to review the agenda. Are there any objections to approval of the agenda as presented? Seeing none, may I receive a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote. The secretary will call the roll.
Ms. Manser?
Yes.
Mr. Abarca?
Yes.
Ms. Cortez?
Yes.
Mr. Hogan?
Yes.
Dr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Wasserstrom?
Yes.
Ms. Wolfsey?
Yes.
Thank you. There is a majority in favor, and the agenda is approved. The first item of business for this evening is public comment. We have 3 individuals who have indicated that they wish to address the board this evening. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. The chair recognizes DeMonte Rochester of the District Advisory Committee.
Good evening, Dr. Bedell, members of the board. On last Wednesday, we had our general DAC meeting where we gave our parents resources like how to learn how to use Let's Talk apps. And a lot of our parents didn't know how to use Let's Talk, so we provided a demo to demonstrate on Let's Talk practices. And also, we had our own Jennifer Woodsey provide information on 2020 legislative agenda. We also talked about the attendance campaign, so parents will know how to get their kids to school on time and the incentives they get if the kids know how to get to school on time. And then I had the person this morning going to the trauma-informed schools meeting this morning at Rockhurst Center, and I'm glad that we're on board with trauma-informed schools, and way to go, and hope that we get the chance to keep going in that direction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Steve Burton with the District Advisory Committee. Mr. Burton, I don't think is present, so, is he? Oh, okay, sorry. Tom Love?
Could I hand these out to the members? And I'm going to give you this copy when I get done. Good evening. I'm here to talk about a particular law that I think we may be breaking. It's statute 160.055, and it's under urban districts. The Missouri law has a different category for urban districts versus regular districts. I really don't comprehend why, but they identify those as just they're in cities with a population that exceeds 300,000. So Kansas City and St. Louis. St. Louis is just over 300,000. I think Springfield's about half that. That's the 3rd largest city in Missouri. So under the on this first page, you'll see that children are required to be 5 years old before the first day of August. Now, some of you have probably heard this idea or this concept of failure by design or something like that. And this is an example of a bad design flaw. Under the urban districts, if you turn over the next page, you'll see that children can be born between August the 1st and October the 1st. And that's how we end up with 5-year-olds beginning 1st grade, which is a real mistake. And we're automatically promoting them, and that's why I believe we're breaking the law. If you look down at the paragraph number 3, it says the child's got to complete kindergarten. Not incomplete, but actually complete it. So this is impacting probably 125 little children that that are in this August birthday group. And when they fail, I think we need to look, when they get into first grade and second grade and so forth, and they're failing, I think we need to look at the psychological impact that has on those children. Now, the best way, I believe, to handle this is to put children that are in this age category into our pre-K program, and then let them mature for a year. And that some districts call it a kindergarten roundup, and they pull the students in before kindergarten, and they identify who's developmentally ready and who isn't. And so I think that's the best way to do it. But otherwise, I think we need to do a second year of kindergarten and take care of it as early as possible. But I believe we're breaking the law. And the impact is, when it comes to the district, at least from a year ago, we had 39% of the children at third grade at first grade level or below in English language arts, which is reading and English. 40% nearly. And we just can't afford to continue to do that. I'm very confident that we're going to improve with our literacy labs and the help that these children are going to receive from the literacy law. But if we could take care of this little piece, it would be huge, especially for those children that it impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Love.
Thank you.
For the presentation of this evening's revenue and expenditure report, the board chair recognizes Treasurer Manny Abarca.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm really disappointed we don't have any media here to cover this part. This is going to be so important to our overall effect to provide public education. So let's get right into it. So page 1, Linda and her team has done an incredible job complying with state requirements to break these budget codes out to a point that it's not only consumable but also transparent. So what she's trying to show you here is our main fund balances and our operations so that you can consume and understand holistically where these dollars are being spent. So very, very important stuff. But I want to draw our attention really to the next page because this is very, very important. So first, I want to draw your attention to the line 5111, current taxes. Board-approved budget of $156 million. And then I want to draw your attention to October actual, and then year-to-date as of 10/31, and you see there's nothing there. And then also to your attention drawn to the percentages collected, which is 0. So that is the total amount of county property taxes that we have brought in from the revenue side thus far, which is not uncommon. But the significant component here is at the bottom left of board-approved budget, where you see the percentage of total budget is 80.77%. That's 80% of our total budget is dependent upon current taxes from the county. So, obviously important for several reasons. So, as we move on from that, there's one more thing that I forgot on this page, sorry. As you look on the year-to-date as of 10/31/2019 column, the third column over, I want to draw your attention to the bottom total of local revenue, which is $13,248,000. The important component of this amount that has been brought in is that almost $6.2 million of that income is actually from the sale of 1211 McGee. And so that's not typical income that we would normally see. That is one-time revenue coming in. So although that is a significant amount of money for most folks, it's important to denote, as of this point right now, we are very cash poor. So moving on to the next page. In the intermediate county, the important element here, again, you'll see, as denoted before, which is not uncommon, we have not collected any of these revenues. But again, in comparison, look at the total percentage of total budget, 2.3%. Similarly, when you look at the state, it's 2.8%. So you start to understand the significance of county property taxes on our budget as a public school entity. As you move on to page 4, you see that the total federal here is a little different, right? I mean, you see some of the incomes here moderately at 30 or so percent. And from our discussion this morning at the wee hours and the crack of dawn, Linda indicated that typically at this point in time, we should see 30% as our average amongst a lot of these line items. And so you'll see some of those commonalities there. But we see here that the total budget calls for $257 million in revenue, but only $19 million, or 7.4%, has been received as of October. So you'll see that at the total revenue line at the bottom, which is pretty significant overall, right? And so you'll see that again in the pie chart that is next. Again, the total impact of the local property taxes collected. So moving on to page 6. Single largest expense is, of course, the cost of our teachers and staff. So salaries and benefits make up roughly 70% of our expenses here, and that's combining both the percentage of total expenditures, the 50.16%, as well as percent of total expenditures under fringe benefits, the 19.79, or roughly $40 million or so. So on the next page, we break out, and again, this is part of the accounting code process that Linda and her team has taken on pretty dramatically. And so as you start to have questions about where the dollars are being spent, these slides help you understand where these dollars are going and why. So moving on to page 8. So a couple things here before we go into the notes. Something that Linda and I were looking at here, or I had a question about, was some of these line items here. And I think it's important to bring to you all's attention, as well as Dr. Bedell and his team, that there are some line items here like textbooks where you see the overall budget, and I have to do Linda's ruler trick that she taught me. The overall budget of $743,000 has been budgeted, but as of thus far in October, we've only spent $134,000. And for an item like textbooks, it's kind of important to have those at the beginning of the year and making sure those expenses are paid. Similarly, some of these other uniforms, library book, resource materials, some of these things. And so we're going to inquire to Dr. Bedell and the team as to why some of these expenditures are not meeting the current thresholds, knowing that probably there should be more expenditures at this point in time because of the start of the school year, whereas the need for brand new textbooks is not going to be at the end of the academic year. But nevertheless, so that is a point that we discussed. We see a total expenditure budget of $275 million for a break-even budget. Of that, we have spent $56 million, and you see on the bottom line that year-to-date we have spent $37 million more than the revenue received to date. This is a reminder of how important fund balance is to our ability to cash flow until we receive the lump sum payments early next year. So again, you'll see the pie chart that breaks out kind of the significant line items here in the budgeting process. So the last part here on page 11. These are our investments that you'll see. The important element of this is the maturity dates. And the reason why we have these maturity dates is so that we can maintain the cash flow to cover our payroll costs, and they're maturing at the time frames that we are the most cash poor as a district, which is not uncommon for typical public schools, but this type of planning shows you that we are planning for these expenses, knowing that we're going to get the large lump sum of total county property taxes in January and February, presuming that we will actually receive them on time. So you'll note here that this occurs twice in November, and that's it. And so we have not made future plans for any further delay of property tax revenues that are coming in, therefore creating a potential scenario if we don't figure this county property tax stuff out. So with that, I want to turn it back over to Linda to give us a brief presentation on where we're at with our county property tax levy thing.
Thank you, Ms. Tabarka. As requested, I'm just going to give you a brief update on local revenue projections and what's happening around that key critical conversation around assessed valuation. this is a chart. We've looked at these numbers in a few different ways, but as I was thinking about how to just bring us a reminder of the importance of the decisions and conversations right now around, do the assessments stay? Are there other things that could happen? I wanted to share this grid, and I'm going to walk you through it a little bit because there's a lot of numbers on there, which I know is a bad thing to do, but I love a lot of numbers. So you see the green 2007 assessed valuation at just under $2.5 billion. And then if you follow that down, you'll see on the right where you see the decreases. 2018 is the next time that we got to just under $2.5 billion. And so in 2008, 2009, 2011, and 12, we continued to see decreases in assessed valuations. And you all know that's so critically important because we don't have the protection of the Handbook Amendment when those values are rolling down. So we didn't have the ability to roll our rate up to offset losses of revenues. So the Kansas City Public Schools and the funding for charter schools that are local took significant declines during that year. So basically, when you look at that 10-year period, the increase in billable revenue for the Kansas City Public School system, all the schools in our system, only went up $1.9 million, which is $95,000 over that multiple year time period. Just a reminder, it takes about $2 million a year just to give a step on salary schedules, which is an average of less than 2% typically, or right around 2% for our teachers and employees. That equals $3 of increase in that 10-year period per pupil in the Kansas City system, and I've used us plus charters in that number. So really just showing the importance of good, accurate, consistent assessment, and those numbers being what we need them to be. So Handbook versus Article 10, and this is really interesting. I'm going to share with you in a minute results of a committee meeting in Jefferson City today around this, so important time to remind us. Kansas City Public Schools is not subject to the Handbook Amendment because of Article 10. I think you guys have that well memorized. So what that means is that as property values go down, we take 100% of the losses, as we saw earlier, and when they come up, then we're able to theoretically recover by taking 100% of the increases. So over the 10-year time, 0.08% change in assessed valuation. No change in our operating levy because we didn't have the protection of the Handbook Amendment to allow us to roll either way that would have been obligated. So basically flat revenues during that time period. So let's look at a district who is under the Handbook Amendment, which could have been any of the other 517 districts in Missouri. I just chose Raytown because Steve was willing to share numbers with me today. They annually adjust their levy up and down according to Handbook. So if their assessed valuation goes up, they might see a small, tiny rollback in their tax levy in order to assure that revenues maintain and that they get some increase, but that taxpayers aren't dramatically impacted. And then the adverse happens when levies go down or assessed valuation goes down. They have a net decrease in the 10-year period of 0.02%, $1.34 or 36% increase in their operating levy, partially because as those assessed valuations were coming down, their tax rate was rolling up to keep their revenues flat, and partially because they had at least one small voter approval of 13 cents during this last time period. So in the last 10 years where we basically had flat revenues, they had an opportunity to have increased revenues in order to do things like provide steps on salary schedules, maintain benefits, and all of those things. So just a reminder of the difference between Article 10 and Handbook. You've seen this slide several times. This then is our story of the green on the left being what our revenues were in 2007, and then you see the green line following assessed valuation. We draw that line across there for that 10-year period. Had revenues just stayed flat, we would have had $147 million more in revenues in the system over that 10-year period. So, now what's going on with local property tax assessments? Here's a little chart that shows you kind of the history for this year's current assessed valuation information. Really important to note that we get that preliminary assessed valuation in March. That is the number school districts use because it's the best, most reliable information they have. The county assessor provides preliminary assessed valuation, and that's what we use to set our levy. You'll recall that conversation. It came in somewhere around the 17+%. We were more around 15% to be a little bit conservative for our budget planning this year. But that was the information we had at the time to set our budget. Then in July, they've continued to complete some of the reassessment process. That number goes up. And then September and October, you can see the results of informal reviews and official appeals through the BOE. We're seeing a steady and consistent decrease. Lots still happening. So November, December, January, February, March, we could continue to see, we will probably only continue to see negative changes to that as that process works. So what's out there and what's pending right now? The County Board of Equalization is considering a few things. Blue Springs Public School BOE representative has made a request for a flat assessed valuation increase. Center was on this list last month when we talked about it. But as the leadership of that district became more aware of their representative's position, that has been removed. Legal Aid has a request for flat AV increases inside a portion of the Kansas City Public Schools boundaries that they've proposed. It's not yet made its way on in the agenda, but it's out there and we'll be watching to see if that happens. There's a legal opinion of Posinelli regarding the BOE's authority that indicates they can set a flat AV increase. They could choose some percentage and just establish that instead of the assessed valuations provided by the assessor, including those that have been resolved by appeals or informal reviews. Additionally, their opinion says that the BOE has the authority to roll back to the 2018 values and then wait until 2021 for a reassessment. So that would impact all of the taxing jurisdictions really significantly if that occurs, and there's a little time in there that is important to note. There are also some local efforts to create payment under protest, and as you know, if someone pays officially under protest, files the right paperwork, they pay under protest, that they've paid their taxes, so they're not delinquent, but the county holds them instead of distributing them to the taxing jurisdictions. So if that happens, we could see some delay in collections of revenue. So all of these things sort of threaten the timing and amount of our revenue collections this year. State Committee on Local Tax Oversight, they did have their final hearing and meeting today, and I've got a little bit of a report for you on that. Their job is to provide a report and recommendation to the Speaker of the House to see if there might be some legislation. So our lobbyists were in the room in Jefferson City today during this meeting, sent some notes indicating that the chairman proposed 4 changes in response to the Jackson County property tax issue specifically, and then allowed committee members to weigh in on that. His proposals were defining a physical inspection as an on-site inspection versus using today's camera and that kind of thing, creating a uniform appeal deadline in July for all counties across the state, requiring all county assessors to be elected versus appointed, and then applying Hancock to Kansas City Public Schools. So while I personally believe Hancock serves a purpose and is a good tool, it's only a good tool if you're sitting at a proper assessed valuation level. So if you are well below it and Hancock comes into play, if as AVs get corrected, you are limited on your ability to take that correction. And so I would love to see us under Hancock sometime, but it could be to our detriment if that happens before assessed valuations are actually accurate in Jackson County. So that will be a conversation that apparently is going to continue. And then additionally, they talked about moving reassessment to every 4 years instead of 2, kind of lessening the burden of proof on citizens, which I think has a lot of support, and a couple of other things, including capping how much rates can increase and phasing it in over a period of years. So right now, this is out there. Representative Washington, fortunately, is on the committee and was there working on our behalf to make sure that our story is understood, and it sounds like the meeting went well, but we'll just have to watch at this point to see if any kind of proposed legislation comes out of this committee. So what does it mean for us? We've run some scenarios because right now it's hard to know. But our estimated tax collections as of the end of October, if everything stayed the same, which we'd know would not be the case, we would be $6 million more than budgeted, because we know that final AV came in higher than that 15% that we used during our budget process. And we've talked about the kinds of things we might use those additional resources for if they came. If the official appeals, they're on the books, there's still about 17,000 of them to be heard. If they come in at 6%, we're estimating we'd be about $2 million over budget. So we're getting pretty much then equal to budget at that point. Should they roll back to the 2018 assessed values, $16 million of revenues currently used in this year's budget would not be received. If they put a cap of 6%, we're estimating that would be about $13 million. And so any of those possible actions that are floating could actually mean that the current revenues budgeted are not received in this fiscal year. The importance of fund balance and cash management and all of those things come into play. So just a reminder of how those monies were put to use in our budget when we got that preliminary assessed valuation. 2.67 average increase for teachers and staff, continuing medical, the mandated by statute increase in retirement contributions, 4 pre-K classrooms, social workers, career and technical ed staff, the reopening of Lincoln Middle, and additional teachers for staff for class size management. Questions?
Mr. Abarca?
Madam Chair, if you'll entertain a couple questions here. First off, I want to make a point. I know that I've seen several people taking pictures. We have the slides out in the lobby for you to take and share with all your friends, and they're also available online. So please share this information, because I think it's important not only just for KCPS, but also our charter peers that this is affecting. So first question, Linda, can you tell us what happens this year if we see reduced or delayed property tax revenues due to the AV adjustments or payments under protest?
So, sort of a double-edged question. Let's say that we have revenues that are not equal to budget, and we experience delays because of protests and the appeals that are outstanding on the books. We've talked about the fact that the end of November, middle December is typically when a school district finds itself in its cash poor position, because you've been living on those reserves to get to the big, when I use my farmer analogy, to sell your crop in January, right? And then you live on that for the year. So cash flow gets very, very tight if those revenues don't start coming in December. So at this point in the year, really important when we go back and look at the things that this board approved to put to use of those new revenues this year, 90% of those dollars are contracted in some manner. They're set aside in a manner that makes it impossible to do anything other than live out that expense. So we would be as proactive as we can. We would spend January, if we see that coming, we would spend January talking about what can we cut, what can we halt, what do we delay, those kinds of conversations. We do have good enough reserve balances that we can manage for a little while. This year, there's such a question about when and how much that it's hard for me to give the best possible answer for that question.
So how would our fund balance and our next year's cash flow be impacted by a rollback to the 2018 AV levels? This is the worst case scenario.
Yeah. So if we went there and we are talking about $16 million worth of revenues that are largely committed this year, basically we're going to have little choice but to spend most of that into existing reserves. It means we start really short next year. It means we have a cash flow issue next year. And it could be September, October when we're talking about how do we fund payroll until we get to January again. So there are a couple of different ways that school districts do that. It is not a situation that a big system wants to be in, but it would be tight. We could also talk about delaying things that normally are spent early in the year, like your question about some of these things. It looks like you'd spend all that money early. We would probably need to talk about what can be delayed until second semester that typically we want to give our buildings and our departments access to early in the budget year.
Yeah, going back to slide 11, I think it's important to note we pull out roughly $10 million from those investments to cover our cash flow.
Every month.
We're talking about a net $16 million loss. So which month do we just not pay our bills, I guess?
Right.
So If the Board of Equalization rolls back the assessed valuation in a flat or blanket manner, when will KCPS be able to collect the increased revenues we should have received on valid property increases this year?
So if they did this rollback and they didn't let the current assessment stand, we have to live with that until reassessment happens again. So that revenue is reduced and lost not only this year, but also next year. It is a 2-year loss of those revenues. So by the time we get to the next reassessment, which would be 21, unless they change it to 4 years between now and then, we've really had to rethink and reduce how we spend.
Yeah, so as the question of rollbacks comes back to us, and probably all of my colleagues are getting this question of we were greedy and are taking this windfall. Had we rolled back, we could be suffering on top of potentially 16 million more detrimental. Final question, can KCPS opt into the Hancock Amendment so we were able to roll up our levy when AV decreases and then roll it back when AV increases?
So to a little bit of what they talked about that today, we cannot opt in. We can opt to voluntarily roll back, which you guys considered, and not knowing what was going to happen and all of these things, you wisely stayed the course. We can roll back, but we would never have that ability to roll beyond the 4.9599. Again, I am a fan of Hancock when your assessed valuations are appropriate, because I think it's fair to the taxpayer, fair to the taxing jurisdictions, but it would not be right for us at this point in time.
Are there some additional questions? Rita Cortez?
I do want to clear up one point of confusion of mine. For payments under protest, I guess I don't have to hold that. Sorry. This is going to be like a running loop of embarrassment. For payments under protest, the taxpayer has to protest a specific amount. So it's not that the entire payment would be withheld from the district, but the portion under protest. Is that correct?
They can protest either, although typically it is what you indicated. They can say, I think this is my amount, the amount above it is what I protested. Yes, that is what would be typical.
Okay.
Mr. Hogan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions. So, my nifty technology just did weird things. Apologies. So I want to go back to a couple of sort of specific questions from September 25th when we had the conversation around sort of approving the tax levy to begin with. And you indicated in one of your slides the $147 million that's been lost over the last 10 years. That's correct, right?
Right.
And we still have roughly $450 million in deferred maintenance as well, right? So crumbling infrastructure, facilities, et cetera, that aren't getting the upgrades and needs that they have in order for our kids to sort of have this world-class educational experience like their peers in the suburbs, correct? Okay. And we still have an upcoming collective bargaining agreement conversation, right? Where we all kind of want to go pay our teachers more. They're on the front lines and fully responsible for educating our kids and caring for them while they're there, right? So I want to talk about, the numbers are important and they're facts and we all need to recognize them, but I want to make this a little bit more personal, I guess. So today I visited a few schools. One of them was Longfellow, and I got an opportunity to spend some time with Dr. Ballard. And when I got there, she was walking around with this cute little kindergartner, right? And they're hand in hand, and it was clear that he had been crying. And he ended up doing half the tour with us, which was kind of cool. But he has autism, right? And we have 10+% of our kids who are on individualized education plans, right? So kids who need social, emotional, physical supports. And those kids are a lot more expensive to educate than kids who are not on IEPs, correct?
Right, yes.
So this is a very personal thing. Our kids are not going to get the resources and the supports that they need, which is going to bring them or put them further behind, not just today or tomorrow, but for years to come. Right. And so when we think about these kids and this money, it's not just a simple number and we're bitching because we're not getting what we think is due. Right. It's because these kids' lives are forever being impacted by the lack of supports that they need. And so I think as we talk about this in the community, as we lobby people at the county executive's office and the Board of Equalization, we need to be talking about kids, right? And the future of the city, not just the numbers. Right. And so I'd like the community to kind of take that away from this, particularly those who are opposed to the funding that we believe is due KCPS. Think about the kids, right? It's not just a number.
Additional questions? I think, you know, and I think one to sort of follow on to my colleague, Mr. Hogan's question, you probably don't at the top of your head have a calculation of how many children will be affected by these various rollback proposals, because we know that we have about 14,500 students. Charter schools are at how many students?
I haven't pulled September membership, but they're going to be at about 14,000 as well.
Okay, and then you add a dozen other school districts or more that are within the county?
Right.
More than a dozen, correct? So many, many thousands of children who would be affected by the decisions to arbitrarily restrict access to revenues to operate the schools. Am I understanding that?
You are, and I think it's really important. You know, we talk about Article 10. Really important to think about the other school districts and how they're impacted as well, because if their assessed valuation is rolled back now, their tax levy was rolled back in September because of the increase in assessed valuation. Once you've certified your tax rate with the state auditor in Missouri, you cannot change that rate. If you get the decimal in the wrong spot and it's 40 cents instead of $4, it's 40 cents this year. And so those school districts would be harmed as greatly from a percentage of revenue collections as we would be, and they are equally concerned about how they're going to serve kids.
And I think my other question is, are there any other measures available to us as a taxing jurisdiction that is highly dependent on these resources to maintain even the most fundamental operations? I think we've seen these letters saying that the Board of Equalization have deemed the Board of Equalization has authority to make that kind of change. What are our rights as a taxing jurisdiction and recipient of those revenues?
You're getting a little over my legal wheelhouse, and it may be a question for Mr. Thornton, but what we know right now is we have to be proactive, and we have to make sure that the impact to public schools and other taxing jurisdictions is understood by the Board of Equalization, because right now they hold a lot in balance for all of us. And legally, what our rights are, I'm uncertain.
And so we don't think those rights as a taxing jurisdiction and recipient of those funds, they're not articulated in statute or anything. We're just we're designated as beneficiaries, but you don't believe we have any stated rights.
I don't believe we have any right to force collection. We have a right to fair assessment.
Yeah, what we have a right to is that they assess the true value of the property, and that's in statute. So.
If it has been determined that there was not a true value assessed, does that trigger any additional rights for us?
I'm struggling with your question a little bit.
Because we have the right to a fair assessment, fair and accurate assessment, and if it is determined, because I think that's what the basis of these appeals are being made on, if there is some determination that did not occur, as stated in law, does that trigger any additional rights for us?
And there's a case law that talks about our standing or lack of standing, and I don't. Sorry, and I don't want to give legal advice in open session. But I'd be happy to talk about that in closed.
Thank you.
Can you remind us, you said that there's a meeting of the Board of Equalization when, and when is Polsinelli producing their $16 million potential cut? And what can a member of the audience do to support or voice their opinion?
So tomorrow, in Independence at the courthouse there at 9 a.m. is the regular meeting of the Board of Equalization to hear their docket of appeals. They have added to that a listening at 9 a.m. to the 3 different legal counsels on their opinion about the Board of Equalization's power. On December 4th, they're going to consider those at their regular meeting, not a docket meeting. My understanding is that written comments and impact statements are invited and welcomed by the BOE. I don't believe there will be any kind of public comment opportunity of any kind, but letting the BOE and county legislators know how important this is and what the impact is, I think is the best thing that constituents can do.
Any additional questions? All right. At this point, are there any ad hoc committees that wish to report to the board this evening? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to announce to everyone, and you should have a flyer as well outside in the lobby. Our next meeting will be on December 11th. We'll be at James Elementary. This is our tradition of going out ever so often to the community, host these same meetings. We hope to see you there. We will also have a reception, so where the board members will kind of hang out and be open to talking to folks who come through. That'll start at 5:30. Again, this will be at James Elementary on December 11th. So we hope to see you there.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. The next item of business is the report of the superintendent. The chair recognizes Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have several items under the superintendent's report. The first we want to share with the community is our video highlight on transportation and in our SafeStop bus tracking app.
This week, we will be highlighting all the exciting progress that Kansas City Public Schools is doing in our transportation services. KCPS has clear goals set as we move forward in making our transportation services one that is safe, timely, and efficient. It is said that everything that is worthwhile takes time. And in this case, even as we pursue to continue the improvement of our quality in our transportation services, we have already in a short time seen great positive changes that encourage us to keep working to achieve a high level of excellence in our transportation services.
KCPS has a new bus contractor starting in July 2019, Student Transportation of America. With this, KCPS counts with bus facility upgrades and increased driver wages that has helped with hiring and the retention of drivers so that we don't experience driver shortages.
Hey, I'm Tina White and I've been a bus driver since 1989. I really enjoy driving the bus for Kansas City Public Schools. It's entertaining, you meet great people, great students, and I really enjoy it. Hey, I think the new buses are wonderful. I love the way that they start by themselves. They drive like Cadillacs. They ride real comfortably. They are just outstanding. The best for the Kansas City Public Schools.
We have also improved our focus on performance expectations for on-time delivery and customer service. The new fleet of buses with the new contractor are all 2019 models. The main home-to-school buses are completely powered by alternative fuel, propane. This means that not only the buses are more energy efficient, but also the buses warm faster in cold months, and they provide 1/3 of noise reduction from the use of propane.
name is Toriana Sadler, and not only am I an employee of the Kansas City Public School District, but I am also a parent. Last year, I had a horrible experience with our previous bus company. I was in a situation where I was making an important decision about the health of my chronically ill child, and one of my other students had been left behind at school. You know, needless to say, that was an extremely frustrating situation for me. However, this year, I have seen a drastic change in our new company, STA. As a parent, I love the ability to be able to track my students' buses and know exactly where my students are. I do feel confident that my students are safe, and I'm excited about all of the new things to come with this new transportation company.
Now, what we are very excited to announce is all the new technology that comes with our improved transportation services. We have tap-on, tap-off proximity card readers installed in all buses for easy identifying who is and who is not riding. We can know in real time when the students got on and off the bus. And our latest tool, which will provide a great level of service to our parents, is the SafeStop bus tracking app, which allows parents to track each bus in real time to know exactly when is the bus arriving at the bus stop, and in this way, instead of waiting outside in the cold weather wondering when is the bus going to arrive or how far is the bus from the stop, they can just check the app and see exactly where the bus is, and even get a reminder or notification announcing the arrival of the school bus.
Bye, have a good day.
So if you are a parent and you have not downloaded your app, we would encourage you to go ahead and do that, especially as we are starting to approach this winter season, and we know that we will have some inclement weather days that we will have to deal with, and it would just make sense to keep kids in the house until we know that the buses are approaching. So I know I need to do it too. I haven't done it, but I will. I promise you. So the next item on the superintendent's report is the presentation for Safe Schools training and our staff training update, and we'll bring Dr. Collier, our Chief Human Resource Officer, to the podium.
Good evening, Dr. Burdell, Board Chair Manser, board members, executive leadership team, staff, students, parents, and all community. I am Jennifer Collier, and today I am presenting on Board Policy 4.2, which is aligned to Pillar C, Strategic Priorities 7 and 9. And tonight I'm primarily focusing on the training that we provide for our employees. So this policy deals with us as employers providing circumstances for our staff members that are, and I'm going to say it in the positive, that are fair, that are dignified, that are safe, that are organized, and that are clear. And then also that we are recognizing our collective bargaining agreements that have been negotiated. So once again, strategic plan alignment, aligning to Pillar C, which really focuses on caring, effective teachers in our classroom and also effective leaders in every school. But then broadening that under strategic priority number 7, having a talented workforce. And we know a lot of that has to do with training and preparation and us equipping our employees as they enter into our organization. And then also strategic priority 9 around capable, empowered leadership. So here are a few of the measures that we use to make sure that we are addressing policy 4.2 around training and preparation of our employees. We provide Safe Schools training, which I'll talk about in just a moment as well. Focus Thursday, Friday training, target training series, and our employee handbook. So our Safe Schools training is an online training module. This is training modules for this year were actually 23 of them, and you'll see there's a significant increase from last year to this year. This is required of all employees. It doesn't matter what position you're in. If you are a cabinet member, if you are a teacher in a school, if you're a cafeteria manager, every employee in our system must complete Safe Schools training, and we do have a tracking system that lets us know when people have completed and when they have not. Email notices are sent out automatically. We roll this out July 1st every year, and every 2 weeks, our employees receive an email reminder letting them know that it needs to be completed by October 31st, and they also get an indication of what percentage they've completed at that time. I wanted to show last year's information just so you can see the increase in our modules and the amount of training that we're providing through Safe Schools. So our completion date once again is October 31st, both years. Last year, our training modules totaled to 4 hours and 15 minutes. This year, it was 6 hours and 48 minutes. And I just want to mention that we had an addition to our department last year, in the middle of last year, and that was our HR attorney. And that addition has been very instrumental to us in making sure in this particular area that we are compliant in the trainings that we are providing to our employees, meeting all those those critical areas that we should be covering. We are now doing that. And so with the Safe Schools training, we made sure that every item that we should be covering with our employees was covered, which required us to require a lot more in time in completion. As of October 31st, our completion rate was 93%. For those employees that did not complete, the minority that did not, those supervisors received notices and a letter to provide to those employees that went in the employee's file to let them know that they did not complete in time, and they have until November 31st to complete all of their modules. So for our Safe Schools training courses, these are some of the topics that we covered this year. And a lot of it is school related, really important areas around student mental health, around FERPA, making sure our employees understand the importance of confidentiality and record keeping. Also sexual harassment, whether that's staff to staff or student issues, bullying. And one of the things that I appreciated about the Safe Schools training this year, I felt like there was more focus on identification of issues, as well as how to respond to those issues if you believe that those are occurring. And so there was a lot of information this year around if you are identifying some issues, then what do you do next in those cases? And all of our employees must take assessments for each of these modules. So you can't move on, or you can't have successful completion of the entire course if you've not passed an assessment for each of these modules. Here are some additional modules that we covered, and we also included some of the administrative policies that we have for our district that we feel are important, those things that leaders typically run into issues with, and also just making sure that all of our employees are aware of these critical policies. And you'll notice that as I go through the training, I'm going to talk about, you'll see that it's layered. Some of these topics you'll see coming up over and over again. And a part of that is really making sure that our leaders are very aware of how to address each of these areas if they run into an issue where they must do so. So here we have our Focus Thursday, Friday trainings, and this is primarily for our leaders, cabinet level leaders, executive team, principals, directors, supervisors. Anyone that actually supervises or evaluates an employee must be a part of these trainings. These are mandatory. The topics change from month to month. As HR, we plan and roll out the trainings, but we are not the only facilitators. We do some facilitation, but we also call in the experts from various departments to come in and to provide training in these areas. For example, we just had purchasing procedure training at our last session, making sure all of our leaders understand what the purchasing process should look like, what steps should they go through in order to be in compliance. It's also evaluations. We want to make sure all of our leaders are aware of what's required around the evaluation, the timeline, and all the pieces that are important to make sure that we're covering critical information with our staff members, and we're putting ourselves in a position that we have fully informed our staff members where they're currently performing at a given time. And so there are various topics that you'll see covered through April. And so one of those I want to mention in December, we purposely focused on trauma-informed care. We know around the holidays that can be, for many people, it can be a joyful time, but for some people it may not be. And so we wanted to make sure that we are really alerting our leaders around supporting our students and our staff during this winter break, this winter season, holiday season. In addition to the Focus Thursday, Friday training, we've added on what we're calling target training. So as you saw, we had a list of topics that we covered that all leaders must go through. They were mandatory. But then we know that there are other issues that may be specific to a department or a group of employees. And so this year, our HR team rolled out target training. And so leaders of departments can select topics that we've already outlined that are prescribed for them. And there were 3 competency-based topic areas that we focused on this year, and that's people skills, communication skills, and organizational leadership skills. So they have a prescribed list that they can select from. However, if there are other specific needs that they are seeing as leaders of the department where they need training, they can request training on a different area if we didn't already suggest that. Also, HR can make the recommendation that a department or a group of people receive training if we are seeing reoccurrences of issues in particular areas or pockets of the district. And so these trainings happen on the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of each month. And right now, I think we have 2 departments that are signed up for training and 2 school sites that have asked us to come in to provide training. And then we have our union negotiations, and just to make sure we are all aware, there are 2 collective bargaining agreements that we work with as a system, and that's the American Federation of Teachers, what we call AFT, and then Service Employees International Union, which we refer to as SEIU. Our union leadership is Ms. Andrea Flinders with AFT and Mr. Jose Aragon with SEIU. From the district side, Ms. Quinley and I sit in together, and we will for both of these particular groups. Ms. Quinley obviously around the finances and me around the personnel. And then we are joining our teams together shortly to begin our negotiations. We'll begin with AFT later this month. That's not the updated version, okay? I think the SEIU will begin in January. Okay. And then we also have the employee handbook. We have not had an employee handbook for very long as a system. We wrote it out a couple years ago, July of 2017. And so when we did, we wrote out a lot of information to our employees, knowing where to find it on the intranet, how to access it. We also, the last 2 years, had Board of Education employees. We provided a special training for all of them right here in this very room. Because it's not new, we didn't do that again this year. However, all of new employees coming into the system must now cover the employee handbook as they're coming through the new employee orientation. So that's covered with them. They actually have their laptops. They are shown how to access it on the intranet, and they're able to review it there. And then they can go back and refer to it later if they wish. Questions?
Dr. Jones?
Thank you so much for the update, Dr. Collier. Can you tell me, does the implicit bias training, does that also include the self-assessment component where staff and teachers take their own, assess their own biases?
It has not at this point. Dr. Davis actually provided the implicit bias training for us at the very first session, but I don't want to speak for him, but I believe that's a component that's coming. Would you like to come speak to that?
It is not in there, but we do address it and share where they can go and take a free test, the Harvard IAT.
Okay, I just asked because, in trainings, the research seems to indicate once people are aware of their own biases and you get it all laid out with the score, like you can go forward and better acknowledge them. So I hopefully people will be encouraged to do that.
Yes, it will require more lengthy time in training.
Yes. Okay. But we'll make note of that, yes.
Additional questions? I have one question, and I'm sorry if you said this and I didn't catch it. Are the Focus Thursday, Friday trainings, the PD for principals, directors, and supervisors, is there a mandatory participation or at least for some portion of those?
Yes, all of them are mandatory. So that is part of the reason why we made it a 2-day training. Originally, when we wrote it out, it was just Friday. If you remember, we called it Focus Fridays, right. But now we do 2 days to give people options. So all of our leaders must attend these sessions either on that Thursday or that Friday session.
Thank you. All right. Okay, thank you. Dr. Bedell?
All right, thank you, Dr. Collier. The next item is, I want to just provide a quick update on some of the work that we're doing around student violence. And I had an opportunity to meet with the mayor, the city prosecutor, and one of the higher-ups in the Kansas City Police Department. I have been huge around having concerns about how this impacts the students in our school district and the amount of social and emotional distress that it puts on students, which often become impediments for them being able to learn at a high level. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to set up a violence town hall meeting where we collected a number of students from each of our high schools that have somehow, some way been directly impacted by violence, whether that's a next of kin or a relative, or even them potentially being victims of having been shot or something of that nature. And we said that we wanted to just come in here and listen to them. So we brought in the Center for Conflict Resolution to facilitate. Each of the leaders said, hey, we're here to just hear from you all around what is it that you think we should do. And what we learned from the students was that they have admitted that there are concerns that there's not enough mental health supports. They feel that they do not feel that they have the ability to identify when somebody is going to go out and shoot someone else. They just, right now, they're not equipped to know that. But they also made a comment that I thought, that I just, I'm a very transparent person, that I think the mayor and I both felt awful around, was they felt like this city fails them. They felt that in terms of the economic development and the things that, the food deserts and those types of things that they don't have within their communities, and that there is no care or concern, that the city doesn't care for them. They also then, some of those students said they felt the same way about our school system. And what they said was that we don't have anger management, we don't have enough trauma-informed counselors in our schools or clinicians to work with us. So then you guys expect us to come in here and to be model students when we're dealing with a whole bunch of stuff that's beyond our control. And I thought about that, and I said, that's something that we just have to figure out. So one of the things I am happy about is that we will be asking our board to take action on approving a $2.6 million grant tonight that will allow for us to be able to provide more supports in that area, training for our teachers, support for our mentor program, support with adding additional clinicians into our schools, and we're trying to do our part. But what we also learned talking to the students was that it's bigger than just the school district. It's a community support aspect that we need support around. It is about making sure that there's an accountability for each of our elected officials to do their part. It is about the legislative agenda that we will ask our board to begin to approve for us to move forward on, and we have to figure out language, but one of those is around the violence and the impact, and asking our state legislators to step up to help support us from a funding standpoint so that we can provide a better level of support for our students. So the next phase of this at this point is that we've collected everything that they've given us. We're going to have another convening where we bring them all back with the officials, and now we will begin to talk about next steps, actual concrete action steps that we will take to try to address some of the concerns that they brought to us as we continue to try to provide a safe city for our students. So I wanted to update you all on that, and that would conclude my remarks in that area. And then one other item that I want to read to you all, and then pass it over to Ms. Manser, and that's around the situation that occurred today as it pertains to attendance. So I want to take this time to briefly acknowledge our communications that have been relayed today. As you might be aware, we've been working through violations that occurred during the years of 2013 through 2016, specifically related to attendance reporting in KCPS. These inaccuracies in attendance reporting resulted in an increase in the percentage of students who were reported as present for 90% of the school year. As you all know, the 90-90 model is a part of the calculations that the state will give you points for based on students attending school 90% of the time and attending instructional class 90% of the time. Please know that these actions conducted by a few in our school district and who are no longer working for our system cannot and will not be tolerated or accepted. While these ramifications might adversely affect our attendance data in the short term, I remain steadfast and determined to continue our positive course we began implementing when I arrived in 2016 after these violations occurred. The findings within the report revealed an unhealthy culture within parts of the school district staff several years ago. We have since worked tirelessly to build a new culture within the district, one that is geared towards achieving excellence while providing a workplace that inspires and empowers all people. We want to remind our community, the people of Kansas City, that we are in the midst of bringing a new vision to life on behalf of the children of Kansas City. Great things are happening for our children. We are determined to continue helping navigate their successful futures. I can assure you that a tremendous amount of controls have been put in place, and when we sanctioned to have this audit conducted after we found out that this was an anomaly, not only did we take a look at the 1 year in question, we looked at the 2 years prior to, which was 13, 14, 14, 15, but we also asked an independent auditor to look into every single year that I've been here as superintendent, because we wanted to make sure that these practices weren't something that was continuing or that they were things that were happening inadvertently. And so I stand by the fact that we have worked with a high level of integrity and honesty under my leadership, and I'm very proud of the work that our faculty and staff have engaged in over these several years. We will continue to push forward. At this time, I will pass it over to our board chair.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell, and thank you everyone who's here this evening. The Board of Directors has been working with the administration throughout this investigation. It's been important to us as a board to provide support and to remain apprised of the findings and the process throughout the time. And while we are certainly very disappointed and frustrated by the findings of this report, we are also very grateful that the current district leadership took decisive action to address the outcomes of the report with the appropriate parties and subsequently implement the necessary personnel decisions. And with that, that includes the continuous communication and collaboration with the state of Missouri. We are also encouraged to learn that the misdeeds following the arrival of Dr. Bedell had ceased, and that we are satisfied with the actions that are now in place, that this will not happen again. We apologize to the state, the city of Kansas City, our teachers, and our staff members of the district. The overwhelming majority of our staff are hardworking, dedicated, committed individuals who come here every day and deliver their best for each other and for the children we serve. And most importantly, we apologize to our students and the parents who depend on us. We believe the district has been on a much stronger path over the past 3 years. The safeguards are in place, and we believe our students are in very good hands. And my final comment I want to say is that I'm privileged to serve with a board of colleagues who are of the highest integrity and ethics and expectations for outcomes for our children. And I know that our board of directors is dedicated to ensuring that there are not only positive educational opportunities for our children, but that the work environment for all staff in this district is a positive, safe, and fulfilling work environment. So thank you, everyone, and we will move forward from here. Thank you very much. We now go to our regular business items. The first item of business are the Kansas City Public Schools 2020 legislative priorities. I turn to my colleague Jennifer Wolfsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Everybody, I'm really excited to be able to share with the public the work the Government Relations Committee has finalized related to our 2020 state legislative priorities. But before I get into those, I'd like to just begin by recognizing the members of this committee. The Government Relations Committee is made up of the board members Rita Cortez and Mark Wasserstrom. But we also have, as a regular part of our committee, administrative members, Dr. Mark Bedell, Dr. Jennifer Collier, Linda Quinley, Dr. Sharnissa Holliday-Scott, Mr. Bill Thornton, Shannon Jacks, and Kathleen Pointer. We often also have other attendees, which include members from the AFT and the District Advisory Committee. So we meet pretty regularly, as I've mentioned before, during my ad hoc reports. One of the things I also wanted to do before I got into the priorities was explain kind of the process by which we got here. As I mentioned, this is a committee of the board, so therefore this is where we take some of our work off that then we do and debate and discuss and bring back. But in particular, this board works extremely closely with the administration. So this was a very collaborative process in deciding what should be the focus for the upcoming 2020 legislative session in Jefferson City. And over the last few months, we've continued to discuss and debate, finally arriving at the agenda that we're going to share with you tonight. So if you'll switch me to the first slide. Thank you, man in the curtain. Everybody, I wanted to just point out, I believe these are out on the front, so if you don't have one and you want to follow along, there's a front back sheet here for you to take as well. So this first legislative priority, I think Dr. Bedell almost did the perfect setup for this about why this was an area that this particular board and administration wanted to focus on this year. And unfortunately, with gun-related deaths continually on the rise in Kansas City and many others, and affordable housing crises across the nation, and cycles of poverty that continue to impart generational trauma, many of our students are not getting access to the lives they deserve. And so we felt it was extremely important this year. We have heard from some of our colleagues across the state, and we've even heard some inklings out of the governor's office around a need for a focus in this area. So we want to support legislation this year that does increase funding for socio-emotional needs of our underserved communities. I will not read through each of these. I will let you do those at your own. But I wanted to underscore, if you haven't, I believe, is the student town hall on the web for folks to, it used to be, it's a very, I don't know if this particular one is, but it's to hear it's not the violence thing that Dr. Bedell was speaking of, but the student town hall that Dr. Bedell also, if you want to chat just about that briefly.
Well, yeah, I mean, the student town halls, we do post them to our website. The last one wasn't, that was a closed door scenario, but, regarding the violence?
Yes,
yeah, that one was not for public consumption. We wanted to protect.
Student town hall one, I think they also, it's the same sort of subject keeps coming up around the need.
Yes.
Around the need for, you have students self-identifying, they want additional mental health resources. They know they need more support in the schools themselves, so.
Ms. Wolfsey, let me just say, you're absolutely right. And if the last town hall meeting that we had for students was at Southeast High School, and that was one of the topics that definitely came up around the mental health support.
So the next one, legislative, so switch me to the next slide, please. So the next.
Somebody else do it.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Collier.
You're welcome.
Our next priority also, we all know that it is getting harder and harder to attract a robust, talented, and diverse teacher population, fewer resources. So we do know that competitive wages are essential. So this year, we wanted to support legislation and funding designed to provide for the teacher compensation that's competitive, livable, and differentiated. Again, I think it was Governor Parsons that has also kind of touched upon a need to increase overall teacher wages in the state of Missouri. Oh. Rita, I will challenge you on being the most, thank you for letting me know that. So, again, this is one that we hope to work in 3 areas. I won't read through each of them. I will let you do that. But this is our second priority. The third priority, Dr. Collier, thank you, is one, that's it. So this is actually a priority that we had it last year, and the reason why this is a priority, this is for us about making sure that the playing field is level, that we're all playing by the same rules as they relate to public education, accountability, and flexibility. So as we know, public ed systems, schools receive public dollars and should have equitable treatment when it comes to the rules surrounding economic and governmental transparency. So this one's a bit more chunky, but it goes into talking about some of the ways in which we want to ensure that public schools are all being held to the same standard. To me, this has always been one of the more important ones because, one, as a parent, I want to be able to compare schools on a like-by-like basis. And if I don't have the same information about them all, that is a very difficult thing to do, as well as a taxpayer. These are our public taxpayer dollars that we use for our public school systems, and therefore this information should then be publicly accessible. So if someone would advance me to the last, thank you. So the last legislative priority is around equitable funding resources and processes. This one is really important as well. At the end of the last year, some legislation was introduced around this particular issue. And Kansas City Public Schools and the neighboring Kansas City charters have been working for the last, I would say, 6 to 9 months on a collaborative process around this particular issue to ensure that we are getting an equitable distribution of revenues to in the KCPS boundaries to the students that are being served. And so this is one that we will work to try and see if we, make some progress on in Jefferson City. This goes to when we get the funds, what line items of revenue are there, as well as when we get them. So I just wanted to make sure that, let's see, did I get everything? Yes. So I wanted to make sure that on behalf of the Government Relations Committee, everybody knew about these 4 priorities and why we had suggested them. And I would recommend to the Madam Chair that the 2020 KCPS legislative priorities be adopted as presented.
First, I'd like to ask my colleagues if there are any questions that you have regarding these legislative priorities. Dr. Jones, I'm sorry. Oh, no, okay. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, please.
So, first of all, I personally feel in support of these. I just kind of felt compelled to state, just for, public consumption, just the idea that for the social awareness, I know we don't have anybody to turn it to that, but for the social and emotional awareness, I just want to make it clear that by no means, by supporting this, are we saying that the trauma and the neglect that people are experiencing in our city today is by any means going to be addressed by us providing more mental health services in the school environment. So I just wanted to say this does not take our community, it doesn't take our local government off the hook. So walking through trash-strewn sidewalks in some of our kids' neighborhoods and putting in requests for the city to address them and that taking months. Not having parks maintained to the level of other neighborhoods in our city. These are types of messages these things send subtle messages to our students that say we don't really care about you. So what we're saying is when they come into the school, now we're going to give you more trauma and social emotional support so that you can help deal with that. And then you go back home to it. So I just want to make it clear that I do support mental health and social emotional supports in our schools, and I'm thankful that we have been acquiring resources to do that. But I don't want it to look like we just got to give these kids some Band-Aids. We just need Band-Aids. I just wanted to be clear that the problem with trauma is not isolated to on an individual level. It's a system. So that's.
Mr. Barton?
Yeah, I 100% agree to my colleagues' opinions there. And like the property tax issue that we just talked about, it requires your all's action as well, those who are watching, those who are listening, parents, students, all of us involved to make sure these legislative priorities become more than just words written on a piece of paper. Because this is our portion to try and bring attention to this and raise awareness, but we are realists in terms of the reality of Jefferson City and the supermajority that does exist in Jefferson City, and we ask that you all take these on as well in your advocacy to make sure that we can accomplish some of these goals and legislative fixes.
Are there any additional comments before we move? I just would like to just make one statement. I want to thank the committee for the hard work in developing these. I also, I think on a couple of these priorities, we have some community groups that I think it's important to acknowledge. So on the social and emotional needs of underserved communities, we came to that through a lot of conversation with our school board peers from other parts of the state. In fact, we worked somewhat closely with the St. Louis School Board, and they have adopted their legislative priorities, and they have included something that's not written precisely like this, but with this same idea in mind. And we are engaging other school board leaders around the state on this very topic, and we have their board members up here who have been very fierce champions for this movement, and I really appreciate that. So I want to acknowledge that. I also want to just acknowledge on the equitable funding resources and processes. This legislative priority was developed through a lengthy process of collaborative discussions with charter school leaders in Kansas City, and that's a little bit, not what probably a lot of people might expect, but I appreciate the district leadership that helped lead some of that work, and I do appreciate the local charter school leadership that came to that table and engaged in that conversation with us. So I'd like to acknowledge those groups at this time. If there are no other comments, Dr. Bedell?
Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, just for the public's consumption, as we think about these legislative agenda items that the board is getting ready to take action on, there is still a fair amount of language and wordsmithing that will need to be completed and conducted, because with any of these bills, our district is always in position where we have bills that we want to get through legislation, but then we also have legislation that we would like to oppose. And I think where the Kansas City region is, in particular around this funding piece with charters, this is uncharted territory. This is where the first district to really come together and try to collaborate to figure this out. But there are also 516 other traditional public school systems that have some concerns about what does this mean for the future of public schools in this state and funding. I am fully committed, and I've shared this with our charter counterparts, that we want to make sure that we're being fair and equitable because all of these students and within our boundaries we share. And I also want to make sure that everybody's crystal clear that we will take a thorough look at our language. We will continue to collaborate with our charters, but we will also seek input as it pertains to making sure that every basis around what this language it composes of is that it is something that will be very doable for our particular boundary and the work that we need to do here in the Kansas City region.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell. It would now be in order to receive a motion.
Madam Chair, I would move approval of the KCPS 2020 legislative priorities.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any debate on the motion? Hearing no debate, the motion is to approve the 2020 legislative priorities. It has been moved and seconded. The secretary will call the roll.
Ms. Manser,
Yes.
Mr. Abarca,
Yes.
Ms. Cortez,
Yes.
Mr. Hogan,
Yes.
Dr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Wasserstrom, Ms. Wolfsey,
Yes.
Thank you. There's a majority in favor. The motion passes. The agenda items are approved. I do want to make an announcement to the community that the Communications and Community Engagement Committee of the board, which is chaired by Dr. Marvia Jones, will be meeting in the morning at 8 a.m. in the Delano room. And so for those who are interested in the work of school leadership, communications, and engagement with our public, please join Dr. Jones in the morning at the Delano room. Thank you. The next item of business are our next regular business item. The chair recognizes Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're asking the board to take action on the DBAZ trip. It's an alternative transportation in the amount of $2 million, making sure I'm seeing these numbers right. And this is primarily a transportation service that we utilize in the bulk of our students that are deemed as homeless, and we have a fair share of one of the largest homeless populations in the state of Missouri. So we utilize this when our students are having to move from home to home or facility to facility to transport them to school.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this item? Seeing no questions, it would be in order to receive a motion.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded for the approval of the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the renewal agreement for alternative mode pupil transportation services with WHC KCT LLC, doing business as Z-Trip. This renewal sets the not-to-exceed amount for August 1, 2019 through July 31st, 2020 at $2 million. Expenditures will be charged based on actual use to the McKinney-Vento Special Education and regular transportation operating budgets. The secretary will please call the roll.
Ms. Manser,
Yes.
Mr. Abarca,
Yes.
Ms. Cortez,
Yes.
Mr. Hogan,
Yes.
Dr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Wasserstrom,
Yes.
Ms. Wolfsey.
Yes.
Thank you. There is a majority in favor, and the alternative transportation agreement is approved. The next item of business.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The finance business item for this board meeting is the acceptance of the VOCA grant. The VOCA grant is the Victims of Crime Act grant in the amount of $2,587,500. We're asking the board to take action to accept this grant.
Thank you. Are there any questions about this grant? I have one question, I believe. Ms. Cortez?
In the terms of the grant, it calls for a match. Are those funds that are already in the budget?
We worked with the grantor to accept current salaries and benefits for the similar positions that we'll be adding as our match.
My question is, The grant is quite substantial. I believe it's maybe the largest federal grant that we have ever received. And I know the compliance component is large for this. Can you describe for me, Dr. Bedell, who oversees compliance for that particular grant?
Yeah, I mean, that will definitely be our executive director in the student support division. But we have our grant writer who's been very phenomenal in making sure that accountability measures are adhered to, Ms. Barbara Wright, who's back here, because we have received a substantial amount of grants since hiring her. And I think we've done extremely well with the management of those particular grants. And so we will continue to also work with our research and accountability division to make sure that those reports are done in a timely manner.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions? All right. The proposed resolution is for the approval of the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the VOCA grant in the amount of $2,587,500. It would be in order to receive a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd like to move to approve by unanimous consent.
Is there a second? Is there any debate on the motion? Hearing no debate, the secretary will call the roll.
Ms. Manser,
Yes.
Mr. Abarca,
Yes.
Ms. Cortez,
Yes?
Mr. Hogan,
Yes.
Dr. Jones, Mr. Wasserstrom.
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were here.
Yes.
Dr. Jones? Okay. Ms. Wolfsey?
Yes.
Thank you. There is a majority in favor and the VOCA grant is approved. At this time, on the agenda, it is, would be in order to receive a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded. Are there any questions or concerns regarding any items on the consent? This will be a roll call vote. The secretary will call the roll.
Ms. Manser,
Yes.
Mr. Abarca,
Yes.
Ms. Cortez,
Yes.
Mr. Hogan,
Yes.
Dr. Jones,
Yes.
Mr. Wasserstrom,
Yes.
Ms. Wolfsey.
Yes.
Thank you. This concludes our meeting this evening. We hope to see you all. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's, okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we do have one more item because next month, I believe it's just a one board meeting month. And so there will be a business item that we will ask the board to take action on. And that's a contract with Northwest Rogers to complete the interior renovation at the Franklin Operations Center in the amount of $360,725.
Thank you. And again, that meeting is at James Elementary, and we hope you will join us. Mr. Abarca?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to acknowledge the Parent Power Lab who's here, representing to learn about the school district, and specifically been working over the last few months to educate themselves as education advocates. So thank you all for being here tonight.
And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.